All right, next Tuesday, we're going to have a guest speaker in here, so everybody try to be here on Tuesday, please. For a couple reasons. Number one, it's going to be Katie from the Oxford Treatment Center is going to be here. She'll be telling us about their programs and kind of recreation therapy in in an addiction type setting, which is something that she can tell you more about than I could by far. Also, it is a close location that anyone who's interested in getting CTRS certified is, it's close to here, and they do a really, really good job of preparing you for the CTRS exam there. Like, it's a good internship. It's not one that you go and you don't learn anything and you just float along. And I mean, you'd be leading groups and doing things that are really going to be helpful. So try to be here next Tuesday for that, for sure. Now I will share the screen back to the staffing chapter here. And this was all about, we talked about, I'm just going to scroll over here on the left to remind me to kind of go over what we went over last time. We talked about human resources management and how, like, when you have an opening in your facility, in your recreation department, how you go about like posting the job and things like that. And it's actually funny because I'm on a search committee right now, and I went to a training on a whole bunch of this stuff yesterday. And we talked about opening the position and doing a budget review and all of these things, what kind of criteria you're going to set for trying to choose your candidate. Are there certain things that are set in stone that have to be there, in order? Do they have to have a master's degree? Do they have to have a doctorate? Those are the things that can either get somebody moved on in the process or kicked out before it even gets very far into the process. So remember that there's internal and external recruiting. Internal recruiting would be like us at Ole Miss hiring someone who already works at Ole Miss in another position into the job. So you're recruiting internally inside your facility. External is someone coming from outside. There's different ways to get job announcements out, such as websites. Internet obviously is number one. Word of mouth, faculty, telling students, even if it's a position that they might be able to fill. Employment agencies. And we talked about preparing to do an interview. This isn't about, we didn't talk about preparing to go through an interview. We talked about preparing to give an interview. And one thing you want to do that we talked about in our stuff yesterday, that I've noted here, we're in Mississippi. It is a state job at the university. And yet the pay is not terrible for the job that I'm on the search committee by any means. However, the pay in Mississippi is lower than the pay in Texas or California or a lot of these other places, right? Also, the living cost is lower here too. But like when you are talking to your candidates, you also need to point out things like amenities that are in the community, your benefits packages that you may have. You need to give them the full job description and specifications and all of the full package, so they understand, like, working here, we have really good insurance. If it's just a staff position that's not a faculty, they get a lot of days off during the year too. Like, that means a lot to people. Time off matters. So you need to explain benefits packages and things like that also. You need everybody, should everybody have a different set of questions? Maybe you don't want to go into too much personal information. You don't want to ask people straight up, what religion are you? What's your sexual orientation? Are you married? Do you plan to get pregnant in the next year? Those are questions that you just stay away from, right? However, you want to treat you're going to know some background on each candidate before they ever get there, right? So you have enough to small talk them to get it started. So that's where it's going to vary. Now, once you get into the interviews, if you're interviewing 2 or 3 candidates, you need to have some common questions there that you're going to hit everybody with. If you don't do that, can you really compare their interviews? Not really. Not if they're not answering things that are similar in scope, right? There are, what did we talk about with the bona fide occupational qualification? What was an example of that? Who remembers? Who remembers what this bona fide occupational qualification would be? And in a lot of cases, if you just looked at it, it looks like discrimination, but there's certain times where there is an occupational qualification that you have to look at specific situations. So what's an example? Yep. Like in a women's correctional facility, you could not have male staff members in there for obvious reasons, because right, females can work with whoever, kinda. Males could not work in a female correctional facility, or it would turn into a maternity ward, probably is what it would end up being if you want to get right down to it. Let's see. There's common selection mistakes we talked about. Sometimes the criteria that people use to make the decisions may be, you might use the wrong criteria. Sometimes applications may be, you know how written statements are like a text message or an email, sometimes you read it with an inflection to it, and like my mom is the worst. Like I'll send her this whole paragraph text of how I would really appreciate it if you could keep the boys for just a little late today. I really need to run by and get something at the store. And I go through this whole thing and she'll just send back, sure. Okay. To me, that's like, I'm pissed off. I really don't want to, but yeah. And I'll be like, and I'll get there and I'll be like, thank you for doing that. She's like, oh, no problem. I didn't mind. And like where she meant it as sure. You know how you can read things differently. That can happen with an application too. And you have to remember that. Okay. You see what I'm saying? Like you can put tone and connotation to things that's not really there. So don't misinterpret what somebody and miss out on a good candidate because you misinterpreted kind of their wording on one part of an application or something. Probably the biggest one that's a problem is at the bottom right there. Urgency to fill the position. You want to get somebody in here. You got to get them in here quick. We need to, you know, we're all having to work harder because we're short. So you push it and you try to force it, you know, you try to force it fast and you don't get a big enough applicant pool and things like that. And urgency will, just like any decision, this is a decision. If you rush into a decision, does that sometimes make us make the wrong one? Okay, same thing goes with hiring. We talked about performance appraisal. I think performance appraisal is important. I think that performance appraisal, when it is tied to things like raises and things like that, is very good. I think as long as your employees know what is expected of them, if it's delineated up front during the next year, I expect you to develop a manual of this, this, and this. I expect you to work 6 Saturdays per half year. I expect you to do 2 holiday celebrations and to set up these Area 4 Special Olympic Games. Whatever, it's all right there. And then you as an employee, you could basically have a checklist. Have I done this? Have I done this? Have I done this? And then you know what to do. And then whether you do it or not is going to actually have some sort of merit on whether you get moved up perhaps, or whether you get a raise. Performance appraisals are huge in that way if they're used the proper way. You know, that's the main thing. All right. We talked about these different performance appraisal methods, and it was kind of long, so I'm not going to go back through all of those since I was kind of just reviewing. So when you do a performance appraisal rating form, they usually come up with, the way they're done, you come up with a rating, and it can be compared to other employees in the same position. And the ratings can have to do with like amount of raise, whether you're moved up in positions and things like that. There's leniency error is one thing that happens because we're actually just getting to the new stuff right now. So you're right on time. The person who is doing the performance appraisal is just too nice sometimes. That's all it amounts to. You have a leniency error where they give them more credit than they deserve, and it makes it where it's not accurate, for lack of a better way to put it. There's a halo effect where you make an evaluation of someone based on like a single characteristic. One thing that they do is either great or not great, and you let that affect their entire appraisal. That's like the halo. It's kind of like it puts a ring around everything. It's based on one particular case, and you're letting that have to do with their performance appraisal, and that's not correct by any means. Ambiguous evaluation standards. Supervisors give different meanings to ratings like outstanding, above average, and satisfactory. Outstanding to me is probably could be different than what outstanding for you is. What above average is for me could be different than what you would say would be above average. So that's where ambiguous comes in, is the fact that people are going to, the rating might be a little off because there's a little bit of subjectivity in that scale. If you see what I'm saying, if you're using a form that has things like outstanding, above average, and satisfactory, that's worth certain points for each one, everybody is going to see certain things as more important and rate those differently, probably. Recency error. What do you think that would be about in regards to someone's performance appraisal? What might a recency error mean? Usually a performance appraisal has to do with usually it's once a year at most places is when it's done. A recency error would be letting things that happened recently, very recently, in the last 3 months, let's say, prior to the actual appraisal, taking precedence over the rest of the year. Basically, you're relying on the most recent occurrences instead of the entire picture. Like they might have been awesome for 9 months and been above and beyond, and then they might have kind of screwed up planning Area 4 Special Olympics because it was their first time. And it was the month before you did their appraisal, and you're still, as the manager, you're still kind of ticked off at them because you're like, man, that didn't go well. That made me look bad. You think it's going to kind of affect the way you do their appraisal if you let it? You see how recency can play into that, because what's on your mind? What's going on now? What just happened? Not what happened 10 months ago. So you got to try to be objective and not let, that's just something, these are just things to kind of look out for. I was like rapping for a minute there. So you have different types of interviews. Screening interviews are kind of like what? What are you doing if you're doing screenings?
criminal backgrounds.
Yeah, that's a lot of times. And if you find something like, say, it's a job that's going to, they're going to have to get a Class B license and drive a school bus to transport clients on your facility. And they've had a DUI in the last year. Think that's going to work out? What would that do to them? You gone, we're going to move on to the next one, right? Okay. That's like the screening process. Screening interviews are the same kind of thing. That's where you have a big bucket of potential hires and you're not really doing, you need to know the answer to a few questions to either keep these people or knock them out. You're not giving them any indication of, hey, you're at the top, you're almost there, you're in good shape. It's a few things, just, hey, we needed some clarification on a few questions. We're trying to fill this position, as you know. We just needed these screening interviews. This is to knock more people out, because your goal when you're hiring, you've got this big bucket full of people that have applied for a job. Hopefully, that's the best case scenario, honestly. Is it a pain in the butt to have more applicants? Yes, because you have more people that you have to treat fairly and go through the whole process with, right? If you Google somebody or like look at their Facebook account, that's not, that happens in hiring, y'all. Just saying. I can't believe I got hired if that being the case. But if you look at one person's Facebook profile, you know what you have to do? You have to look at every one of them. So if you're going to do that, you better, what I would do is wait until I did screening interviews and I threw a bunch of people out of this bucket first, where I don't have to research every single one of them. You may want to check Facebook on the top 5. You know what I'm saying? So your objective when you're trying to hire, when you're trying to fill a role, fill a spot, is you want this big bucket full of applicants. Your real objective at first is to throw a bunch of them out. How do we cut the number down to a manageable number where we can make a good hire? So yes, you are kind of nitpicking and things like that. And you do it through committees, you do it through ratings and ranking processes and things like that. But that's what screening interviews are, to help cut down your number a little bit more, that you just need to actually speak to the person to help make a decision. Phone interview, what's that? I think we know what that is. We've seen a rise in that lately. Less of it right now. It's kind of slowing back down, kind of like Skype and FaceTime or whatever the different things are that we use for interviews. We prefer face-to-face interviews if possible. Sometimes that's not the case. Now, can you do, say you have 5 applicants that you come down to, that would all, you think they'd all be good choices. Can you do 4 in-person interviews and 1 Skype interview?
Yes.
Trick question. Yes, if you've given all of them the option to have an in-person interview, and the 5th person says, I'm just not comfortable getting on a plane, or I don't, it would be a lot easier for me if we just could do a Skype interview. Now, me as the person interviewing, if somebody says it would be a lot easier for me if I just did a Skype, that's kind of a negative to me a little bit, if they don't want to take the time to come in person and have a face-to-face interview. But they might have a valid reason, so you got to keep that in mind, And then there's face-to-face interviews, individual, where that's like a one-on-one deal. Group interviews, you might bring in, there's some situations where you can bring in more than 1 candidate at a time and have people asking questions. You talk about, that's a high contact interview right there. Like, that would be kind of interesting. It would almost be like a debate. It seems like it would turn into, you'd be wanting to outdo the other person's answers and all that stuff. There's also group interviews where you have just the person comes in and there's like, say, a round table of DIPs sitting around that are hitting you with questions and stuff, rather than a one-on-one or a two-on-one interview. Like it's kind of like I've said before, I've done both, and I actually enjoyed like a group interview better, where I had several people at the table that were talking. I felt more comfortable with that for whatever reason. I don't know why. And then there's assessment centers even for interviews. Something that we all don't like to even think about sometimes as far as being a manager. And we talked about how you can be too lenient when you're doing your yearly review on people as a manager. I find myself, I would be that way at times. You know, I want to think the best of people. You know what I mean? You want to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're trying or whatever. But when there is, you're going to have at your facility, there is generally a policies and procedures manual that is there. And it is for you to be able to provide discipline as needed if people don't do what they're supposed to do at work. And this is kind of this is the order, and this is why it's called progressive. Now, it's not this way at every location, but this is pretty common as far as discipline and how it goes in the workplace. Generally, there's just an oral or a verbal reprimand where you're just going to say, hey, we got to pick it up a little bit. I don't need you to do that again. There's no, you don't necessarily even put anything in their folder, like in their personnel folder or anything like that. It's just kind of like, here's your one free strike, but we noticed that this happened. Then let's say they're doing the same thing again. Next step would be a written reprimand, where they would have something go into their file. You would sign it. They would sign it. It's basically like saying, yep, I know I'm taking my slap on the wrist. I agree that I did this. Now you've got documentation. I talked about documentation being important in everything, even in, especially in discipline. Because if you fire somebody, what might they decide to do? Sue you. People love to sue somebody now. So you better follow the protocols and the procedures that are in front of you that you're supposed to follow if you ever have to do this discipline stuff. Then it's followed next by generally a final written reprimand, which can be up to a suspension. Usually with the second written reprimand, it's a stronger written reprimand, and there is a suspension, which it can be with or without pay, depending on, that's probably going to be in your P&P manual that tells you this is how it goes. And then if by this point, then it's termination. See how it's pretty hard to get fired, y'all? If you care at all, like at most places anyway, if they follow this type protocol, I mean, you got to be pretty much intentionally doing something by the time, I mean, you're on strike 4 if they're giving you written reprimands for the same thing over and over, like. Now there's a EEO statement. Let me see. Well, I'll pull up ours here at Ole Miss in just a minute. But equal employment opportunity has to do with employment law. And the goal, it says here, is to achieve equal employment opportunity, as it was stated at the top. Everybody needs to be treated fairly and equally in employment decisions. It means everybody gets a fair shake, regardless of what? Yeah, I mean, regardless of whether they're male, female, white, black, green, purple, old, young, pregnant, you know, everybody needs to be treated fairly and equally. All the way down to, you know, how fair and equal they make it here. They want major diversity on like a search committee, even like our search committee that I'm on right now for the gerontology position that's open is 2 or 3 females, at least 2 males. We have 4 different nationalities, I think, on the committee. That tells you that that is actually part of this EEOC by putting the committee that is helping to make decisions on who's going to be interviewed diverse, and we're all doing our own rankings individually, and then numbers are just like aggregated at the end. So that's helping to make sure people are being treated fairly and equally, and that you don't have one person who is just like, no, you know, who's racist or misogynist or something like that. That's just not going to treat, you know, people equally and fairly in the process. If you have a diverse group, then that's going to overcome that issue. You know what I mean? You'll just have one outlier that doesn't fit the case. It protects against discrimination based on sexual orientation, age, disabilities, marital status, parental or pregnancy status, and military veteran status. Coincidentally, those things down there at the bottom are also things that we were told basically not to ask about in interviews, unless there is something that is job specific, like, you know, say you are hiring for a ropes course coordinator or something like that at a facility and you're working in rec. And so that generally is going to be outdoors, right? It's generally going to be hot. You might have direct sunlight. You might need to know, for sure whether or not this person can be on their feet for 6 hours a day. If that's going to be their job to run the ropes course, they have to be able to do that. So are you, in that case, are you discriminating against someone's disabilities if they can't do that? Not really, because it's the job description. You see what, like, kind of where the difference is there? You're not discriminating. That's just a basic job function that has to be present. Okay. All right. I'm going to stop share here. We're going to go. Let's see. Close that. Open that. Back to here. Share screen. Let's talk just for a few on this chapter 10. So this one is about something else that you're going to do as a manager. You know, that's something that I keep bringing up. You know, this is about supervision and administration side of therapeutic rec. That's a best case scenario. That's where you want to get to, y'all. You know what I mean? Everybody enjoys the aspect of working in the field, hopefully, you know, and providing the activities and leading groups and things like that. But, you know, obviously who's going to make the most money? Do you want to move up in your position? Yeah, I mean, it's going to lead you to an administrative role. So remember that's, in theory, even though it might be kind of out there to think of it right now of being an administrator and over a department or something, as you be first stepping into a field, you got to remember that hopefully that's where you get, you know. So one of the things that you would be in charge of that is kind of a different scenario is volunteer and intern management, because they're not really directly employed by your facility or by you. So it's a little bit different. It is, however, it's still part of personnel management because they have to have supervision, right? If they're volunteers or interns, people that, I'm over the SRA 401 intern class. For people who do that, they have to have a supervisor for their internship, wherever it may be, someone that's signing off on their stuff saying that that's what they're doing. That would be you if you would be the supervisor if you had a student there doing a internship with you. So you're going to either be directly responsible for the volunteer or intern, or you'll work in conjunction with your agency, HR department, or there might even have a volunteer department, it says, or the unit staff to manage volunteers and interns. Okay. That means basically depending on what the intern is going to be doing, whether they're going to be working out on the floor, whether they're going to be, it depends on what specialty, what exactly they're going to be doing is going to be who they're going to be under. You as the TR manager, if they are interning in therapeutic rec, you're going to be the one that is overall responsible for them. However, if you have a specific recreation therapist that works with, say, hippotherapy, horse therapy, that they want to really learn about that, and they do that every day, you could say, all right, I want you to work with Tom, and that's going to be their intermediate supervisor, basically. So that's what that long convoluted statement comes down to. You're going to be, overall, you're in charge, but you can hand them to someone else to supervise them also, people on the unit. So it's organized in phases, planning. You basically have to plan to say, can we do internships here? What are some reasons why you might not be able to, or you might think about it twice about doing internships?
Some places you need to have more certifications and eligibilities than interns and volunteers are given.
Yep, sometimes you might not be, like, by law able to do that because of that. Your patients have certain states, especially if you have to have licensure to work with individuals or something like that. Anything else come to mind? I won't say it would stop you from having interns, but it can give you pause when you think about it. Somewhere that has a strong, okay, what about the place where Tiger Woods went for, like, detox? You think that was way back when? You're like, huh? Or any big name celebrity that has to go for, like, drug and alcohol detox. You think that's a good place to have interns running around? Probably not. I mean, they'd have to sign all kind of confidentiality statements and things like that. Places that have really, really strong confidentiality is a place that. Now, that being said, it's a strong component at the Oxford Treatment Center. It's a rehabilitation center, and she welcomes interns. But one thing that happens once you are selected, moving to the next line, once you're selected and chosen and said, yes, you can intern with us, you have to go through an orientation process, which orientation is what? Given the, like, this is what we're all about. This is what we do. This is our facilities. This is what you'll be doing. This is what we expect of you. It may be a specific training that they tell you you're going to have to get it. Basically, you're getting all the goods right there. And probably at your orientation at the treatment center is probably, you better be quiet. Confidentiality, confidentiality, confidentiality. That's my guess. I think that would be a big thing that they push for interns. Because honestly, what's going to stop an intern from coming back and sitting around with a bunch of buddies at the bar and talking about a funny story that happened at work? It's part of it. they know that it's a possibility, but it's more benefit to them. That's where, like in the planning section for the Oxford Treatment Center, they thought about all of this, I'm sure. And they said, but in the end, they said, we'll get more benefit and our patients will get more benefit if we actually have an intern program, even if there is a chance of confidentiality being broken. You see what I'm saying? I think they say it's worth the, the chance. Then once you've been selected and you have been orientated, then you're going to need training and supervision. There's specific job site training for the things that they're going to be doing during their internship, that they're going to need training for, because that's the whole reason they're there, right? If they're an intern, they're coming in to learn about the profession. So they need training. So you as a manager or as a facility need to be able to provide certain amounts of training to these interns and volunteers. Then it's going to go, there's an evaluation process, just like for my 401 students. They have to have a midterm and a final evaluation by their supervisor. So you would be expected to do that. Generally, if they've done a good job, you want to try to give some kind of recognition for a job well done. And then termination sounds dirty, but I mean, most cases you don't have to fire interns and volunteers, because number one, they're not hired. Number two, they're there of free will, trying to make a good impression. That's basically just saying the end of their term with you, the termination of their, they need to return any keys or things like that they had while they were there. So as far as going back to that last slide, it says that you have to prepare or plan as far as volunteers and interns. You have to assess whether your agency is ready for intern. Do you have enough staff to supervise interns? Yeah, you might could use some extra bodies out there, but if you don't have the staff to supervise them and have them doing the right things, would you be getting more detrimental effect than you would positive? Absolutely. Define benefits and outcomes. What do we look to get from volunteers and interns by opening this up and bringing and advertising even to try to get volunteers and interns? What do we expect? Then you can look at standards and regulations regarding volunteers and interns. Look at similar facilities to yours. Look at your P&P manual, policies and procedures. Look at what standards and regulations. Make sure that you're not going to be breaking any rules or anything like that by bringing them in. If you need to establish and update any policies, then you can do that for your facility. Prepare job descriptions for volunteers and interns. I think that's very important for a couple reasons. Number one, it gives them very clear expectations of what you expect out of them while they're there. This is your job description. This is what you will be doing. This is who you will be working with. This is the times that you'll be here. Things like that. A job description, just like any other job. So as an intern, especially, it's going to feel more like a job, right? If you've got a job description of what you're going to be doing, you've got something you can actually look at, then it's going to feel more like a job. You will treat it more like a job a lot of times. So I think these job descriptions are kind of underrated and very important. Prepare staff and training resources. If you're going to train people in something, you got to have, it's not just going to come off the cuff. I mean, if you have specific, might need to bring someone specifically in to do a training. If your intern is going to be working out on the waterfront all summer at a camp, something like that, you may want to get them lifeguard certified if they're willing to do that, right? Think that would be a good idea? Would it be worth your time to pay for them to be lifeguard certified? Absolutely, because they're going to be there most cases 400 or 500 hours. That's a lot of lifeguarding you could get from an intern. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not saying that you're just using them. I'm just saying you want them to get a well-rounded experience. And there may be some times when, for the benefit of the facility, that would be the best thing you could do. You need to come up with some, just like for any staff, you need to have screening criteria and processes. And just like she said earlier about screening, you know, that's things like background checks. That may be every volunteer or intern needs to give you 2 references that you know, the funny thing is, you know, on job applications and things like that, you realize how often people actually call your references? Not much. Especially, I mean, maybe right, if you make it to the very last couple in a search, they may call your references, but it's kind of like what I said about if you're going to check one person's Facebook, you have to check everybody's Facebook if you're going to be fair and equitable. So if you call one person's references, you have to call everybody's references. And if you have a ton of people that have put in for a position or for an internship or whatever, and you're going to do it fairly, you'd have to call every single reference. Do you want to do that? I'm just saying, but by putting references on that could be part of your screening criteria. Most people that are willing to put references on their applications are going to be better choices than someone who wouldn't like that. You know what I'm saying? Like if they were scared to put references, that tells you something about them. So then you need a marketing plan to recruit and to retain volunteers. You know, you've gone through the trouble of saying, yes, we can have interns. Yes, we have this person who can supervise them. Yes, we can provide this training. This is how we're going to do their orientation. These are the job descriptions. This is the hours. You've gone through a lot of trouble at this point, right? I mean, you've gone through several steps. Now it's like, okay, we're ready for them. Let's get some. So you have to get a marketing plan to recruit and get it out there that you, like I went on LinkedIn and said, hey, I'm over the therapeutic rec program at Ole Miss. I'm looking for places for students to do internships. You know, that's not me recruiting for someone to come here. I have also shared some things about our program here, but, you know, people put out things on LinkedIn and things saying, looking for intern, you know, we have an opening for an intern. That is a direct marketing plan to recruit someone. And then retaining is just how are you going to basically saying we're going to treat them right. We're going to give them these benefits. Some internships are paid. Some internships provide housing for the person, you know, because they may be coming from out of state. To me, that's huge. That would be a big deal. That's a lot of cost if you think about trying to come up with lodging for 400 hours worth of work. You know, you're talking minimum of 2.5, 3 months of paying somewhere. So then you're trying to say, who are we going to choose? Because you don't want to do orientation training on volunteers and interns that aren't going to be good ones. So you have to choose the ones that you think are actually going to stick with you, be good. And that the way you do that is you get an applicant pool. The best case scenario, like I said, you really want to have a lot to choose from. That's what gives you a better chance of having a better volunteer, a better intern. But you select your candidates from the pool. You interview the best ones after you've done some screening and cut some out that didn't seem like they would be a good fit or weren't qualified or things like that. Once you've interviewed, they accept after you make an offer, then you place them. Basically, you say, okay, we've got a spot for you. Then you orient them to their work tasks, you know, what they're going to be doing, the agency, and the other professionals. So that's like you walking around the facility with them when they come in and say, here's our equine facility. Here's our pool. Here's our therapeutic room. This is our, sensory room. This is whatever, Hey, this is Tom. He's our physical therapist. You'll be working with him a lot. This is so-and-so. She works in the cafeteria. You're just introducing them to the place, to the other people that they're going to be seeing all the time, because while they're with you, they are basically just like an employee. Okay. And that's how it should be treated, especially for interns. Now, volunteers, I'm speaking less about them, because volunteers generally are going to be, they can come and go when they please. You don't have to do as much orientation, because there's not as much expected from a volunteer as there is from an intern. So you see why I'm giving more info on, you won't have to do as much training, as much things, orientations and things for people who are just simply volunteering. At that point, you need to identify the training needs, go over with them as far as supervision, who's going to be supervising them, and how they're going to be evaluated. Now, for the 401 class that I'm over, they have an internship manual that has, they've got built-in evaluation procedures there, but that is for the university. For the facility, they should have an evaluation form of their own too, which that just promotes the intern doing a better job, right? If they know they're being double evaluated, that's good for you. And at that point, then you're going to complete contracts and agreements. We have that in our manual too, where there's an internship agreement form. The student signs it and their supervisor signs it. So when you're going to do this training, you're going to prepare, organize, and conduct it. The training can be not on all sorts of different things. It may be CPR and first aid. It may be confidentiality. There's a lot of different, depending on what their job description entails, that's going to have a lot to do with what their training is going to cover, right? So then you're going to supervise your volunteer and how they interact with your volunteer or intern, and how they interact with other staff, with your clients. What sort of interactions are they having? Is it appropriate? Are they too standoffish? Are they not meeting enough people? Are they, at NMRC, I would see interns come in who were very standoffish from the clients because they'd never been around that population before. Understandable. But as a supervisor, when you're watching and you see that, are they really getting the full experience if they're in the back corner all the time? Not really. And you're not getting much out of them in that case. So that's why you're going to supervise to see what kind of interactions they're having. At that point, you're going to document performance to see what kind of progress the intern's making. That should be a continuous thing. A lot of the documentation would be done by the intern themselves in most cases. And then you're going to keep track of what kind of volunteer and intern, how much participation you're having. Sometimes what it's talking about here, if they've had good documentation and of doing a good job the whole time, they could very well, what happens at the end of a successful internship sometimes? Exactly, you get hired. So if you've got good paperwork backing up justification for hiring of this individual and you have a spot, they've already been trained, they've already worked there for a bunch of hours, they understand how it works, they know everybody. Wouldn't it make sense for that person to be retained and promoted from intern to employee? That's kind of common sense right there. Now we're finishing up with internships and things like that. you've told them already starting out what kind of evaluation measures you're going to look at for them. What are we going to look at to decide whether you're doing a good job? Are you coming every day? Are you showing up on time? Are you dressing appropriately? Are your interactions, appropriate with the clients? Are you maintaining confidentiality? Are you keeping your workspace clean? I mean, it could be whatever. There's so many things that could be. It depends on where you work, what kind of facility you're in, and what kind of internship program you're running. But they need to have evaluation measures that they understand, that they know about, that help them to get ready for what it says here, entry-level practice skills. That's your goal. While they're doing their internship, you want to provide them with training and experiences that will get them ready for entry-level practice. Basically, they can step into a job, whether it's with you or somebody else, because these internships are the last step usually before someone's trying to get a job, right? So you need to get them ready at the entry-level readiness stage. As far as volunteer evaluation, like I said, totally different from internship. For volunteers, you just want to note things like how their volunteer experience, their willingness to volunteer, enhance the quality of your program. How did it make us better? How do we justify the little bit of training that we have to do for these volunteers, or the insurance that we have to carry to have interns or volunteers? You need to have that sort of thing. So there needs to be some sort of evaluation done to show, because of volunteers in the last year, we were able to serve 50 more patients than we expected to during this time to this time. Our Christmas in the Park event was doubled in size through the use of volunteers from the community. Things like that. That's the kind of stuff that you're looking at. As the manager, that's going to be the person who's going to recognize staff, volunteers, and interns. And what you want to do is make sure, now there's gaps. You may have this constant stream of interns basically, but if say it's interns from schools, there's going to be little gaps in time where you won't have interns just naturally. Okay. There's times when school's not in sessions and interns you just may not get one semester, So your job is to make sure that you maintain continuity in client services when your volunteers or your interns depart. So basically, what you're putting out doesn't need to decline when the internship is over and you no longer have them. That's your job as a manager, is figuring out how are we going to pick up what they were doing? Who's going to take this share of what they were doing? Who's going to do this? And it might be through your marketing and pulling in another intern or volunteer. That may be how you feel it. It's not saying that you have to do it with your workers. It's saying that you have to maintain continuity of quality of service. So once when you lose a volunteer or an intern, they should still continue to get the same level of care. Okay, this is the last one for this. We rolled today, y'all. Trends and issues. Volunteers, like I said, are different from interns in that they are there for, generally, they want a meaningful short-term experience. Have you guys volunteered? Have any of y'all, because probably not because of the timing of this, like been able to volunteer for Special Olympics? That sucks. Okay. That would be a volunteer situation that people want to have a meaningful short-term experience. Strictly, you're going to go help run Special Olympic track and field one day from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Short term, don't need a lot of training, don't need a lot of anything, but you're serving a purpose. You'll feel good about yourself. You'll know that you helped the situation by being there. Interns, now they're looking for quality experiences and generally are challenged financially. we're talking about most interns are nearing the end of their college experience. That's what an internship usually is about. Or if you're doing a true internship, you can't hardly do that and have a real job at the same time. Almost impossible. You'd have to work 18 hours a day to make that happen. And that's just not feasible for a long term. You're going to fail one place or the other, I can tell you. So that being said, you have to try to think of ways where you can help interns when you can. As a manager, a way that you might be able to pull in interns would be to, let's say your facility has lodging of some sort. Maybe there's an area that's not always full and you could have 1 or 2 apartments or rooms set aside for the recreation therapy interns, and it would be worth it to the facility because it's like they're getting 2 workers and all they're having to do is let them use 2 rooms that aren't being used anyway. Or maybe you could set up a deal where they could eat in the cafeteria at the facility. That would help with finances also, right? I mean, think that would be a pretty sweet internship, actually, if you had lodging somewhere and meals. Even if they weren't the best, that would be cake for an internship now. But you have to take the time to train and supervise volunteers and interns. So it's a challenge, because it's not just you that's going to do the training as the manager. So it's not something that you take on lightly as far as being a facility that says we're going to be an intern friendly, a volunteer friendly facility. You have to make that decision. Do you want that? Are you going to take that on? Because if you do, you have to take the time to train and you have to supervise them. You can't just have a bunch of people that aren't trained, that don't know, just out running wild everywhere. Something happens to one of your clients from one of these volunteers, negligence or something like that, then you're going to be in big trouble. You get no benefit. So you have to make the decision whether it's worth it to go through the whole process. They're starting to be kind of, as she mentioned a little while ago, she brought up standards and regulations and licensure and things like that. Volunteer and intern management is starting to be increasingly professional and influenced by standards and regulations. So we're starting to see regulations come in even to this, which in the past has not really been the case. The main things that I would take out of this is realizing that as a manager, you have to do a lot of planning up front. You have to commit to it. You have to make them feel important, and you have to make your internship experience enough to where your person is ready to step into the first part of the workforce when they leave your facility. That's your goal. Clear expectations, recognition if necessary, maybe even hiring if they have been that worthy of it. All right. Chapter 10 is done. Let's see. Today is Tuesday, right? You guys don't forget, get that next part to me by tonight. And I will see you guys on Thursday. Next Tuesday, we have a guest speaker. Don't forget, everybody try to be here for that and be on time. And I'm probably going to cut out early on you that day because I'm actually going to a concert, which I never do. See ya.